guys from former Soviet countries might just take over. There's a solid possibility within the next year or so that every single male UFC champion will be from a former Soviet Union country. With UFC 306 coming soon, there's a pretty good possibility that Merab Dvalishvili can defeat Sean O'Malley, and at the time of writing the script, Merab is a slight favorite at around -140 and is a stylistic nightmare for the primarily striking Sean O'Malley. His cardio is nuts, and we could very well witness a wrestling masterclass from Merab and see another Georgian become champion this year and another guy from a former Soviet Union country get that belt. But even if you don't have Merab winning this fight, which, I mean, there's a solid possibility, Sean finds Merab's shin like he did against fellow wrestler and teammate Aljamain Sterling. But even if that happens, Sean would probably have to face another guy from the Caucasus Mountains region in Umar Nurmagomedov, who's coming off a great win over longtime bantamweight contender Corey Sandhagen. And the amount of guys from this region consistently getting to the top, or at least their chance to the top, got me thinking, holy shit, we could very well see every champion in the UFC being from a former Soviet Union country, or specifically this region right here. And I'm also only going to go over male champions, but there's also another possibility this Saturday that Valentina Shevchenko, who's from Kyrgyzstan, can also be champion. And of course, speaking of Saturday, a word from today's sponsor. UFC is going down in Las Vegas this weekend, and I'm pumped to see who comes out on top. DraftKings has an offer that's perfect if you are looking to get closer to the action. I'm very, very excited for this fight this weekend. I'm really wanting my boy Merab to win, but who knows? It's going to be a very close fight and a hard one to predict. And if you want to get in on the action and trying to predict this fight, all new customers, again, can just bet $5 on anything and receive $250 in bonus bets instantly. And if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. DraftKings is the one-stop shop for all things daily fantasy, where you can join in on all the fun and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code TJLovesFights and bet just $5 on any wager and get $250 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code TJLovesFights only at DraftKings Sportsbook. So in today's video, let's explore the possibility of every single UFC male champion coming from a former Soviet Union country and whether or not this is going to happen within the next year or so. But before we begin, we obviously have to answer the question as to why these guys are so good in the first place. So if you haven't watched my video on why Dagestani fighters in particular are so good at fighting, basically the reasons I shared there are pretty much shared across all former Soviet Union countries and are practically the same reasons why guys from Georgia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, etc. are so good at fighting. There's several reasons I cover there, but the short answer is Sambo. Sambo is a wrestle-heavy martial art that was created by the Soviets, which would spread to practically everywhere in the Soviet Union and would be practiced by millions of young men across the region. Though this was primarily a dominant wrestling-oriented martial art, combat Sambo in particular mixed in solid striking in addition to the wrestling that would make it one of the best, if not the best base for MMA, outside obviously starting out with MMA. A vast majority of fighters come from a very one-dimensional background. We have a decent amount of guys coming from a pure striking or kickboxing background, like the face of the UFC, an extremely active beast, Alex Pereira, Dricus du Plessis, the champ, Israel Adesanya. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you also have a lot of jiu-jitsu guys coming from Brazil, obviously stemming from the legendary influence of the Gracie family. Some of these fighters include Charles Oliveira, of course, flyweight champ Alexandre Pantoja, and Gilbert Burns. Then you have a group of guys with an American college wrestling background. This obviously includes Dana's favorite, John Jones, Dana's soon-to-be favorite, Bo Nickel, and no longer one of Dana's favorites in Colby Covington and Michael Chandler. All of these guys came up in the fighting scene as specialists in their respective martial arts and had to develop their grappling or their striking in order to compete at the highest level. And in doing so, a decent amount of time in the UFC is spent developing what they lack. But this is very different from the guys coming out with a Sambo background, or at least from an area with Sambo influence and more of a well-rounded martial arts culture. Combat Sambo, again, might be the most MMA-ready martial art, and in competition, guys have to mix it up even if it's a grapple-heavy martial art. So with all the reps guys are getting in, not just wrestling, but solid striking in there too, oftentimes these guys are dominating their early competition in the UFC. And like mentioned before, the guys that they're facing are often coming from a one-dimensional background and may not have the striking or wrestling to keep up. This leads to a lot of these guys having great or even undefeated records. Of the 9 undefeated fighters in the top 15 in each weight class, 6 of them come from former Soviet countries, which of course is no coincidence. Outside of MMA, the combat sports talent coming out of these countries is just insane. Of course, Dagestan has produced some of the best pure wrestlers in the world, and since the creation of Sambo and its spread across the Soviet Union in the 90s, a Dagestani has won gold in wrestling at the Olympics since 1996, which is crazy considering how small the area really is. Georgia, in a similar vein, has had someone medal in either Greco-Roman or freestyle wrestling since 1996, and this year had a gold in both wrestling and judo. Kazakhstan obviously got on boxing fans' radar through the dominant run of Gennady Golovkin, who was destroying people in the 2010s and was a product of the 90s era Soviet Union. We are currently seeing the result of the Soviet Union spreading a fighting culture in the 90s, with most, if not all of the guys undefeated, and top guys in general from Soviet countries being born in that generation in the 90s. I'm assuming their father's generation saw the spread and success of Sambo and Soviet wrestling, especially at the Olympic level, and so put their kids in wrestling programs young, which led to a whole generation of killers. Islam Makhachev, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Merab Dvalishvili, Ilia Topuria, Shavkat Rakhmonov, etc. All these guys are a product of the Soviets wanting to create a fighting generation in the 90s, and though the Union would collapse, their impact on fighting lived on. So now that we've established why this particular group of fighters are so damn good at fighting, what is the likelihood that they just completely take over the UFC? The first division that comes to mind when mentioning this group of fighters is lightweight, and Islam Makhachev looks far and beyond better than the rest of the division. He just took care of Dustin Poirier, he took care of Charles Oliveira, he took care of Arman Tsarukyan, granted when they were both really young, and the only person who can really rival him right now in my opinion is Arman, as he's shown to be able to go head to head in the grappling. But that's also because Tsarukyan himself is from that post-Soviet generation, with him being from Armenia. So with Islam Makhachev on top and probably the only guy really rivaling him also being from a former Soviet Union country, lightweight is pretty much a lock for the next year or so to have one of these guys on top. Moving down to featherweight, this is another division that already has someone from a former Soviet Union country, this time in Ilia Topuria, who comes from Georgia. Max Holloway, of course, is Ilya's biggest threat, and though Ilya's the favorite, I've detailed that Max has a solid chance at taking back his throne. But if Ilya is able to take down Max in this 50-50, I think he dominates everyone else. I really see no one in the top 15 being able to rival the young and talented Ilia Topuria. In addition, you also have another undefeated guy in Movsar Evloev, who's also from the Caucasus Mountains region in Russia, who already has wins over top contenders Diego Lopez and Arnold Allen. So again, with a guy already on top and another guy in the top 10, if Ilya gets past Max, this division could very well also be a lock for the next year or so. Now we get into the weight classes that aren't necessarily locks, but definitely has potential for getting a guy in there at the top. Starting with welterweight, going back a couple weight classes, I'm damn sure that Shavkat Rakhmonov will take over this division. Shavkat might be the scariest guy in the UFC period, with 18 wins and 18 finishes, being able to submit and KO guys, and also hails from a combat sambo background. I was really confident Shavkat was going to get a win over Leon Edwards, and now with Bilal on top, I think Shavkat matches up even better and will be the champ as soon as he gets that shot. But maybe Bilal proves the world wrong again, I don't know, but I think realistically it's highly likely that Shavkat gets to the top and stays there. I will admit Shavkat gets hit a lot at boxing range, and JDM is in that division, but I still think Shavkat is a nightmare matchup for everyone in that weight class. So again, in the next year, Shavkat may have that in the bag for Kazakhstan. As for bantamweight, there's a solid chance that this week Merab gets it done and another guy from Georgia becomes UFC champion. And like I said before, even if Merab loses against Sean, there's a solid chance that Umar gets his shot at Sean and gets another title for Dagestan and the Nurmagomedovs relatively soon. So even though this isn't a lock, there's a high possibility that either a Georgian or a Dagestani fighter is at the top of the division in the next year. Then the next divisions I'll talk about only really has one guy, one chance to make it to the top. Starting with light heavyweight, if Magomed finally gets his chance against Alex Pereira in Abu Dhabi, he has a solid chance at becoming champion. He's obviously the worst matchup for Alex Pereira stylistically at that division, and is also favored semi-heavily to take the belt if he does get the chance to fight Alex. I would imagine after Alex Pereira beats Khalil Roundtree and Magomed Ankalaev beats Alexander Rakic, this fight should be coming in next year, and Dagestan could very well get another champion. Middleweight's pretty interesting because if Khamzat Chimaev takes his vitamins and gets healthy and gets back to his monster self, I think he has a solid chance at beating Robert Whittaker and going after Dricus du Plessis or Sean Strickland after their rematch. A healthy Khamzat is a matchup nightmare for anyone in that division, since his grappling is probably the best in that division. But the big if is Khamzat's immune system, and that is far from a lock. Quietly, you also have Nasruddin Imavov, who's the 4th ranked contender, and he just came off a controversial decision against Cannonier. He also had a solid win over Roman Dolidze, but he did lose to Sean Strickland, so I doubt that he can get to that next level for Dagestan, but who knows, he's also a solid name up there too. At heavyweight, we have 2 big Russian contenders at this weight class, but with Sergey getting beat down by Alexander Volkov, it really comes down to Volkov avenging his loss to Cyril, which I think can happen since Cyril has been acting more than he's been training, and Volkov has really turned things around, but then he would have to avenge his loss to Tom Aspinall, most likely, which probably won't happen. But in any case, there's still a chance that Volkov can get in there. And then finally, we have flyweight, which is probably the least likely division to see anyone from a former Soviet country become champion. This division, however, does have Tagir Ulanbekov from Dagestan and Asu Alambayev from Kazakhstan, but both guys are at the top 15 very early in the career and nowhere near a title shot yet. So the likelihood of literally every single champion in the UFC coming from a former Soviet country is probably pretty low, but from bantamweight all the way up to arguably light heavyweight, having a champion from a former Soviet Union country simultaneously is actually pretty likely. Honestly, the only weak link here is probably Khamzat Chimaev, but besides that, within the next year or maybe 2 years, we could possibly see every single champion coming from a former Soviet Union country, which is fucking hilarious to me, because the domino effect of Vladimir Lenin creating the Soviet Union and then having every single UFC champion or the top talent coming from these countries is absolutely hilarious and very interesting. But anyways, what do you guys think about the effect the Soviet Union had on combat sports? Who's going to win this Saturday between Merab and Sean O'Malley? And again, thank you guys for always supporting. Peace.